Can you guys hear me well? Good volume? Yeah? Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll be reading some nonfiction today, and it is called Prayer in a Hospital. This is about going to the service for Muslims that happens in the University of Iowa hospitals just across the river every Friday around noontime. So, prayer in a hospital. In conference rooms 6 and 7 on the 5th floor of the Pomerantz Center, one of many interconnected buildings inside the sprawling University of Iowa's hospitals and clinics, there is a collection of office cabinets against the northern wall. On top the counter made of the bottom cabinets resides a small cardboard box that holds 6 clean white cloth sheets and 1 doormat-sized blue rug. A piece of paper taped on the outside reads, "Kindly do not remove from this room, thanks." I had been wandering lost for some time and feared I'd not arrive by 12:45 p.m. The size of the hospital is not quite clear from any one entrance. The internal volume feels achieved at times by Willy Wonka magic, which meant that even people who spent more than 40 hours of their week inside the complex for months or years could not be aware that there was a service held each Friday for Muslims. Shortly before arriving at the designated rooms, I'd been picked out of the flow of hospital foot traffic by the information desk lady. It must have been my face. Her booth was tucked into a corner and staffed only by her. She bent at the waist and spoke fast and used various smiles to enunciate her meaning. She was well-informed, yet eerily cheery, upper middle-aged, and of healthy pallor and stature. "Ah, yes, it's room 506 and 507. The elevator bank down the hall to the right, not the left. Go up 1 to the 5th floor, and then you take a right out of the 5th floor's elevator bank, but go left down the hallway. So right out of the elevator, but left down the hallway. Follow the signs to the Pomerantz Center. That's where you need to be. Go past the Melrose Dining Hall, past elevator L, left to the conference rooms. Look against the east wall for the rooms. They should be down there." I began looking around, searching for the word or the thing. "Let me draw you a map," she said finally. This is when I arrive at the request to kindly not remove the box from the room. I peeked my head and then body inside and discovered the 2 rooms to actually be one smallish rectangular conference room tucked to the side of the cafeteria. 2 tables were jammed into the south side, ad hoc along with the chairs. The sun was at a harsh angle above my right shoulder, which provided direct light for the landscape. This was a cold and clear, dry February day. I looked through the window, which filled most of the wall's 25-foot length, and found myself standing in oblong rectangles of sunlight cast on the floor. East out of the window, a bit of Iowa City under the sun of a winter noon stood. There was first one of the parking ramps for the hospital near and to the right, and then beyond and left of center, but still in the foreground, there were the 3 dorms and the roads running through. The middle ground of my vista was dominated by the horizontal gap of unoccupied airspace where the Iowa River runs, which constitutes for the city the separation of east and west, and the bridge which spans it. Then in the background, but not too far, but up on its hill and perch, shined the old Capitol's golden dome and company of limestone buildings and massive oak trees, next to the red brick, steel, and glass of downtown. All of this, due to the freckles of ice and coating of fresh dry snow, glinted. The room too was lit up, and there I stood squinting, considering my current endeavor. I sighed and looked at my watch, 12:15. I waited outside the rooms on a bench that ended up being directly across from the service elevators. I watched nurses wheel patients about and doctors walk in pairs past everyone else. I saw 2 sheriffs escorting a man chained at his hands and feet to a wheelchair with bandages coming out of his mouth. One wheeled him in and turned him about while the other pressed the button. Then they both stood on either side of him. All 3 were now facing me. He was wide-eyed and watching me from the center of the elevator as the doors began to close, and I felt the increasing symmetry of the scene encroach upon my anxiety. We watched each other through the closing elevator doors, and life began to feel like a dark Wes Anderson film. for me, and I figured continued misery for he. And I don't know what he'd done to arrive at that moment, but I felt bad watching. 15 minutes feels like a long time when you're aware that's how long you're waiting. There was another interruption by another doctor, but we'll come to that. Still waiting, I drifted more. A year before this moment, you see, with a good portion of the last of my money from student loan refunds during the beginning of the second semester of my junior year at the University of Iowa, I sublet my apartment and bought a one-way ticket to Cairo, Egypt, a year after the revolution. In Sheremetyevo Airport, north of Moscow, which was my layover, my third and smallest bag, carrying all my extra cash, was stolen. I arrived in Egypt in the middle of the night with $15.25, and the visa I paid cost $15. I, with my large duffel bag and backpack in hand, found my brother awaiting me outside on the hood of his friend's car. I want to mention, Toyota Camrys from the 90s with rust stains on the hood are ubiquitous. They are around the world. After a hug from my brother and an introduction to Nasser, my brother presented me with a spliff, and I was introduced to Cairo through a roadie on the ring road at midnight. I jumped back to the hospital when I realized that in all my time traveling with no money and too much time, I had stepped not a foot into a mosque, whether during prayers or otherwise. That was not, at that point, in its scope of history, strictly historical. Due to the tensions, I had been ushered away from the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem when the sun began to set. I had only ever seen the odd individual pray in public, off to the side in the subway tunnels or down a path in Al-Azhar Park, at the back of a shop with sons. I looked at my watch, it was now 12:30. I found myself feeling my heart's beats in my neck, and through the sound of my heel tapping the floor, became aware of the pistoning of my right knee. I wasn't sure for how long I'd been doing this. I sat up straighter, and with only occasional lapses of mild heel tapping, kept my hands still in my lap. And then, like the TSA, I jumped at the sight of an Arab and looked at my watch. "Hi," I said loudly while grabbing my bag and coat. My name is Jared," I said, extending my head while still a few feet away. I was hoping, I study Arabic and Islam in school. I was hoping I could observe prayer today. He looked from the door to my outstretched hand and back to the door before reaching out and shaking my hand. "Hi," he said, smiling easily in recovery. "I am Muhammad." He seemed to be in his 30s, trim and healthy. "Oh," I said, perking at the name. Are you Muhammad Jamal? Doctor? I saw the reservation was made by Dr. Muhammad Jamal. Did you reserve the room, or did an organization?" I realized a worry, that of asking ridiculous and ridiculously fast questions along with stringing too many sentences together. No, he said, laughing. "You will find many Muhammads." I tried to chuckle with light embarrassment and said, of course I would, while shaking my head at myself. "It's the most used name in the world now, right?" He pointed to his name tag while smiling and said, "I'm actually a nurse." His name tag was a black plate that spelled his name out in white letters, with a second yellow plate attached below with black capital letters that read, "Nurse." It was pinned to his clean and all-black scrubs, and I stumbled through more polite introductory conversation while Muhammad reassured me as much as he could that I was welcome. Then his attention turned back to the door. "There's a man in there," I said when Muhammad went to open the door to the soon-to-be prayer rooms. I looked in over his shoulder, and sure enough, there was the chubby white doctor in mismatched pastel scrubs I'd spoken with some 10 or 15 minutes before. I told him prayers were in 20 minutes or so. He'd said assuredly he'd be done by then. I had not believed him then, him, with a to-go slice of Sbarro's pizza, a bag of potato chips, and big styrofoam bowl of to-go soup, sports section under armpit. And just so, there he was, paper splayed wide around him, napkin held crumpled, bulge of food in cheek. The room, absent a smell before, now was scented with greasy pizza and potato soup. He turned and looked up as we entered, and after Muhammad explained the situation, I think he said, Oh, sorry, are we done with food?" Oh, no problem, my friend. Finish, Muhammad said, backing up. "We will let him finish," Muhammad said to me as he closed the door. We sat next to each other, facing the same elevator the prisoner had exited the scene in, and where the nurses and doctors came to and went from the Melrose dining room. I felt again to be a character, and then began considering that the chubby doctor's choice of food was on par with the other healthcare professionals I'd seen coming and going from the cafeteria, as if it were scripted. What I would have not imagined to be scripted, though, was the number of sketchers that have a mound of rubber shaped like a half moon for a soul, which are supposed to tone as you walk. When not wondering, what am I doing here, I was asking bad journalese questions, tripping over words in English while oddly incorporating sporadic Arabic. I nearly asked, "What keeps you coming back?" It was as if the years in college, shokran, and time spent traveling, trying to become culturally savvy, to be able to get it and tell other Americans about it, had instead uniquely qualified me to give rise to my Orientalist nature, whereupon I could shout through Facebook, "I spoke with an Egyptian Muslim living in America, working at a hospital. I went to their prayer too. You should have seen it. Check out my pictures." I'm not sure if he was Egyptian, and I took no pictures. As men began filing in, removing shoes, laying out the white sheets, Muhammad introduced me to Bashar, who would be giving the sermon. Bashar, a portly, balding, early 40-looking Arab man with glasses and only a few days' beard growth, was 5 years removed from Jordan. Thus, he looked at his open palm when he said it, 5 years in Iowa City. Men kept coming in, just from the cold with puffy jackets, nurses or doctors in scrubs, doctors in white robes or nice clothes, one surgeon in full kit with a mask pulled down to his neck, and perhaps a few administrative staff or civilians or medical students. As time progressed past 12:45, which is when they were to begin, and men kept arriving, I finally asked one if women would be joining. He said they do not pray here, and unsure of how to follow up that in this context, I meekly refrained from trying to. My note-taking, I worried, would stilt whatever moments of peace they found in this quiet, sun-bright, secluded room, now warm with bodies lining up and sinking to their knees, some under the trapezoids of sunlight now shrunken to only a foot deep. My notebook remained in my back pocket, my hands in my lap, and me in the back on my knees, eyes moving and weight shifting to spare one ankle alternately the crush of my body. So, I skip a section here because he goes into prayer, and I'm not going to go through the stories and the parables with that. So, suffice to say, the sermon happens by Bashar, and it's about forgiveness, and here's the next section. Prayer, the sermon over, ensued abruptly. I was then, and am even worse so now, in the habit of not understanding spoken Arabic efficiently, instead translating it in my head to English, and so the abrupt change to melodic Arabic, initiating the physical rituals of prayer and bringing the supplicants to their feet, was unexpected. Finding myself still on the floor, ignored so far as I could tell, I watched in awe. I can't speak to specifics more than the basic observer might glean. There is only the white sheets on the floor. They are either sat, standing, or prostrating on the floor in clean rows throughout, but in unison. They scoot to make space at the ends for errant supplicants, otherwise making their own lines in awkward spaces. They allow a body to form. Around the world in its various Fridays, men, and in many mosques, women too, though usually apart, were joining together to perform this same ritual, which began with a single man in 610 in Mecca. For 3 months, traveling from Cairo through the Sinai, across into Jordan, and then west into Israel and Palestine before heading south again, first to the Dead Sea, and then again back to Cairo. I heard nearly every day the call to prayer sung, exploding suddenly from the loudspeakers atop the mosques, or intentionally lost walking a residential street, a young boy or an old man would suddenly make their presence known to me, standing atop steps or just in front of a door, hands cupped around their mouth, singing the call to prayer. In this room, though, conference rooms 506 and 507, Muhammad's voice had been the voice to make the initial call to prayer, and so now, as prayer continued, Muhammad's voice was, for me, easily distinguished from the body chanting Ameen. Their agreement was response to his Allahu Akbar. This give and take was coupled with a 90-degree bend at the waist composed of a straight back and hands on knees, before lowering to the knees and sitting back on your feet in submission to Allah's will. Your weight would then shift to be on your hands and knees before your forehead came to the floor, all before rising and repeating, responding always to Allahu Akbar with Ameen. Just as abruptly as it began, and once again, to my surprise, sitting as I was in quiet meditation, prayer was over and everyone stood and began to rejoin their feet with shoes, and the slight smell of feet lessened. The smell of pizza and soup had long dissipated, and I found myself once again in conference rooms 506 and 507, where men were folding white sheets and little groups formed and lingered in conversation. So I just have two other quick things that I'm going to read to you. They're very short, and I hope you can appreciate them. The first one is called "The Heart's a Dangerous Fuel for Burning in the Cascades." I was climbing in the Cascades this past summer, just being a bum. This is something that came out of it because a friend of a friend died while mountaineering, and so this becomes a topic of conversation. The heart's a dangerous fuel for burning in the Cascades. Through the moss and cedars rise, along glacier rivers falling. Let glory not be the prize, earned with each step burning. Though the peaks we idealize, the joy is in returning to the base whence you realize, for one more day you've staved a mother's mourning. The mountains have their rules to prioritize. Unfortunately, they're always changing, slowly and surely before our eyes. Lost in looking, we forget we should be reading, lest the mountain tell us lies. And the last thing that I'll read is what I call Cape Mears, Oregon, October 14th, 2015. I had just woken up on the beach and looked out into the ocean, and there was my girlfriend. Topless in the cool morning of late October, thigh deep and braced against the last little chariots of ocean power, while barrels of white noise break beyond, and the cut of a northern tern's flapping vibrates through the salt spray. She holds out her arms, not too high, and feels the passing of each wave. Thanks, guys, for listening.